Millions of men were sterilized, millions of women were forced to abort, and millions of infants were killed as China enforced its one-child policy. Now, more than 30 years after the policy was first implemented, the country is in deep trouble because there just aren't enough children in China. In fact, as of 2022, China's fertility rate stood at a paltry 1.702, which is below the 2.1 needed to maintain its size. Understandably, this revelation has caused quite a panic in the Asian country as experts warn that if the trend persists, the Chinese population size of 1.4 billion plus is sure to shrink significantly. In this video, we delve deeper into China's one-child policy and trace our way to January 2016 when it was stopped in favor of a two-child policy. We'll also shed light on the three-child policy introduced in May 2021, and more importantly, answer the critical question: is it too late to convince Chinese parents to embrace the change? The one-child policy was a strategy adopted by China in 1980 under the leadership of Deng Xiaoping, meant to control the country's rapidly growing population. As the name suggests, the policy demanded that most couples have only one child and was triggered by concerns that the Chinese population had mushroomed to 969 million in 1980. Up from approximately 540 million only 31 years earlier in 1949. Let me give you a short backstory. So, after the establishment of the People's Republic of China in 1949, the government trained a large number of barefoot doctors to provide healthcare to poor and rural areas. This strategy was a success and led to a significant decrease in the mortality rates and an increase in the population growth rate, which rose from 16 per thousand in 1949 to 25 per thousand just 5 years later. It was this very population growth that prompted the first attempts to promote family planning in 1953. But despite these efforts, the total population in China continued to grow, reaching over 800 million in the late 1960s. By the 1970s, China was facing food and housing shortages, leading to further efforts to control population growth. Now that you have the backstory, let's go on. So, the National Health and Family Planning Commission enforced the one-child policy through some very extreme measures, including fines and forced abortions. Speaking of fines, in 2013, filmmaker Zhang Yimou, known for directing The Great Wall starring Matt Damon and his wife, were fined 7.48 million won for having 3 children. If you violated this policy as a civil servant or an employee of a government-affiliated organization, for example, a university, you'd best have other plans for earning a living because a job loss was imminent. See, population concerns aside, according to the Chinese government, adhering to the policy was a way of expressing support for the country's economic growth. And to give credit where it's due, China has managed, or rather, the Chinese people themselves, has managed to raise a massive 600 million people out of poverty, thanks to the one-child policy. What if you couldn't pay the fine for violating the policy to the National Health and Family Planning Commission? Well, families that did not pay the fine for having more than one child could not have additional children in the national household system. To put it plainly, their additional children were not legally recognized and did not have access to social services such as education and healthcare. As the Chinese put it, they weren't allowed to have hukao, a government registration needed to access some benefits. That's right, no problem with your hearing whatsoever. Now, among other things, the one-child policy has also been criticized for leading to sex-selective abortions or infanticide, mainly targeting girls due to a long-standing cultural preference for boys. This has since led to some social scars. For instance, in some provinces of China, the ratio of males to females reached 120 to 100, leading to a large number of single men who were unable to find partners due to their lack of wealth. These men, referred to as bare branches, because they could not contribute to their family trees, were left without the opportunity to marry due to the imbalance in the gender ratio. And although the sex ratio for births has been decreasing in recent years, the estimated ratio in 2019 was still above the natural rate of 105 boys for every 100 girls. But the policy has been somewhat relaxed over the years. Rural families were allowed to have 2 children if the first was a girl, while ethnic minorities were allowed an extra offspring. Urban couples were also permitted to have a second child if both parents were single children themselves. But all that said, China has avoided some 400 million births because of the one-child policy, as per the word of a spokesperson for the National Health and Family Planning Commission. Now, you're probably wondering, what happened if a mother had twins? Fair question. While each family was allowed to have only one child, a loophole allowed couples to have more than one child if they gave birth to twins, triplets, or other multiples. In fact, some reports suggest that this loophole led some women to take fertility drugs to have multiple births without violating the one-child policy. After more than 35 years, China's one-child policy would end in January 2016. A law was signed allowing all married couples to have a second child, and it came as the economic powerhouse struggled with an aging population and declining workforce. In March 2018, the National Health Commission took over responsibility for population management from the National Health and Family Planning Commission, and officials stated that the term family planning would no longer be used. Moreover, other policies that discouraged people from having children, such as the ability for companies to fire employees who had extra children, were gradually lifted in some provinces. In 2017, President Xi Jinping also removed the usual reference to family planning in the party work reports, stating that China would instead promote the coordination of childbirth policies with other economic and social policies. This marked the first time in nearly 30 years that the party work report did not mention birth control. After the 2020 census in China revealed that only 12 million babies were born that year, a decrease from 14.65 million in 2019, the government announced in May 2021 that couples would be allowed to have up to 3 children. The fertility rate in China in 2020 was 1.3 children per woman, which is below the replacement level of 2.1 needed for a stable population. Worse still, according to surveys conducted by China's National Bureau of Statistics, (NBS), the average number of children Chinese women were willing to have in 2020 was 1.8. The census data also showed that while the overall population of China continued to grow to 1.412 billion in 2020, the working-age population declined while the elderly population increased, leading to calls for the country to fully open up childbirth. Many young Chinese people are hesitant to have children, or even more than one child, due to a lack of affordable childcare, rising living costs, and long work hours. In its most recent estimate in November 2020, the Chinese government predicted that the country's population would peak in 2027. However, independent demographic expert He Yafu indicated that the population would start to decline in 2022 as the number of births falls to nearly 10 million and the number of deaths surpasses 10 million. He Yafu also predicted that the number of new births in China would drop to around 11 million in 2021 and another 1 million in 2022. There have already been signs that China's birth rate and population are on the verge of falling, with some experts warning of serious consequences. According to official data, Beijing, which has a population of around 21 million, experienced a 24.3% decline in its birth rate in 2020 compared to the previous year. In addition, China saw 10.035 million new registered births in the household registration system in 2020, down from 11.79 million in 2019. And it's important to note that this figure does not include the entire population. It may be challenging to convince Chinese couples to have more children due to time and financial constraints, as many feel they can only afford to have one child. A study by Yun Zhao at Brown University found that working women often view multiple childbirths and a successful career as incompatible. A commission created by the US Congress also found that women in China face significant discrimination from employers, particularly in regards to pregnancy and maternity benefits. And while removing the cap on the number of children that couples can have could lead to faster improvements in fertility rates, officials may need to first improve medical services and schools and implement new tax breaks for families. Immigration is unlikely to be a solution, as China has strict limits on foreign workers. In the meantime, businesses in China, particularly those facing labor shortages in the Pearl River Delta region, are investing in automation and robots as a response to the declining population. That wraps up our video on China and its population control policies. What should China do? Let nature run its course or formulate more population policies? Let us know in the comments. And if you enjoyed the video, like and subscribe to the channel for more videos.